the Eagles are the better team, and the Eagles are going to win the Super Bowl.
Welcome back to The Edge. And if you haven't seen the episode before, this is a podcast where we break down everything from schemes to players, technique, coverage mechanics, analytics, the salary cap, and everything in between. We really try to cover all our bases here. I'm Eagles Eric. I'm joined by my esteemed co-host, Sam Finkel of Inside the Birds. I've got the All 22 closed for now, and I got a list of your questions. Some thoughtful, some unhinged. And let me tell you, some of these I've been itching to answer, and I'm excited to tackle them with Sam today. Others I didn't even know I had an opinion on until I saw them. But we're going to get into it today, starting out with our game plan segment. All right, Sam, getting right into it. We're going to put the questions right up here. And this one's from David. Who is most likely to get double-digit sacks? We got Jalen Carter, Moro Ajomo, Jix Hunt, or Nolan Smith. I'll kick it over to you first. I want a name, and then obviously I want an explanation of why you think that person.
Yeah, so I think right off the bat, I'm just going to say it's probably going to be an edge, just because that's just the way that the functionality, at least it was last year as well. And I think the answer is probably Nolan Smith. That's probably who I was going to go with. So I have a chart of all the like last year's statistics in terms of pass rush, pressures, sacks, snaps per pressure, snaps per sack, and win rate. And then I have some advanced statistics as well. But for Nolan Smith in particular, his snaps per pressure, it was the best in terms of the returning guys. So he was getting pressure every 8.5 snaps. Also, his snaps per sack were the best. He was getting a sack every 38.64 snaps. With that being said, Jix Hunt had better time to sack, time to pressure, and had a faster get off. So I think it's going to be one of those guys, but my money would probably be on Nolan Smith.
Isn't it crazy that the Eagles have an edge rusher who ran a 4.39, and he had the slower get off time? Now, I think there's some sampling bias there. If you're on the field for more rundowns and the way Fangio likes to play his fronts, you're going to read the run first. If you isolate it for third down, I wonder if the get-off numbers might change, and we could definitely look into that. But I totally agree with you. I also picked Nolan Smith. Carter, he's going to demand a lot of attention. We saw the double team rates last year. There's absolutely no reason that's going to change now that Milton Williams and Josh Sweat are gone. He may see even more attention. And there are ways to weaponize that, and we'll talk about that as we get into the pod. But QB scramble to the right more often. Nolan Smith is likely to be on that side much more often. They kind of like to keep their guys on their sides, and that's secondary to their fronts, even linebackers to a degree. He's gotten progressively better, and we saw him really master that ghost move, inside counter. He's getting better with his hands, and he's a really good finisher. I mean, you're a quarterback and you see this guy in pursuit mode, it's watch out. He's going to hawk you down and he's going to tackle. So I'm thinking like probably a 10 sack season. I don't necessarily think raw sack numbers are indicative of your overall efficacy. And, people may say like, he almost did that last year in some small sample size towards the end of the season. I think I'm going to forecast 14 sacks, but we've seen that in previous seasons. Like Eagles had like the all-time record for sacks. They looked like they improved their talent on their front, and then they had like 20 less sacks the subsequent season. So things don't happen linearly like over time. And I think 10 sacks would be great. And it's likely that I think the sack totals across the line will be like, fairly evenly distributed I don't think you're going to see like one guy get 15 and the rest have like 4 or 5 necessarily.
I agree. Before we move on, though, just a follow up for you. Do you think opportunity wise that, Hunt and Smith will have similar opportunity to get these sacks? Or do you think that a rotational guy is going to take away either of those guys' opportunities?
No, I think Nolan Smith is going to play an incredible percentage of the snaps. And then obviously we have Uche, Ojolari, and potentially Pal Ryland waiting in the wings on the other side. All those guys are going to get their opportunities. And that's obviously going to cut into their production totals. So if you really want to evaluate it, you can kind of do it on a per snap basis. Granted, if you have the same production in much higher volume, you're just better because you can do it when you're fatigued. You can do it when teams have more tape on you, etc. So yeah, I think Nolan Smith's going to play dramatically the most snaps. Do you agree with that?
That was kind of where I was hoping we'd go with it, because I do think that just from an opportunity perspective and volume perspective, Nolan Smith is probably positioned best, at least in opportunities as well.
All right. Now let's get into our next question from our esteemed channel mate, Johnny Page. What were your top 5 offensive and defensive play calls from the Eagles previous season? What did you appreciate from a scheme perspective? And I'm glad he asked. Now, defense is really tough because number one, you don't know the exact call, and it's more like the way the players play out and match coverages than it is like some incredible play call, especially with the way Fangio operates. So I kind of honed in on offense here. So I just wanted to kind of show 5 of my favorite plays. So you may recall some of these. So this was a play action rollout against the Packers. You may remember this. And it's something that I just wish they did more. Get Devontae Smith in space, and we'll kind of roll this again. The Eagles ran, a fair number of play actions, but a lot of them were kind of like bullshit play actions. Not much of a fake, kind of half-hearted, not necessarily affecting the linebackers. But this one was more committed, and then you just have Smith coming across the field, kind of this 3-level stretch concept, and it gets him wide open. This wasn't a busted coverage, and I just like this kind of concept. I think it would work often. You can do it obviously to the right or left. And it also has the added benefit, if no one comes open, now you have Herz out of the pocket on purpose rather than him just drifting out of a clean pocket and then having to toss the ball away. Before I go to the next play, did you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah. So you kind of just gave me a huge flashback. So I was sitting in the offensive war room for Penn State when I was coaching there. And James Franklin said to Ricky Ronnie, who was the offensive coordinator at the time, we need more move the pocket. We need more rollout plays. And it just reminds me of this. They had this giant debate, and it was so intellectual. It was incredible to see about the efficacy of move the pockets and rollouts. And James Franklin, who played quarterback, was really big on it. And Ricky Ronnie hated them. But I think it was more of a personnel thing. We had Sean Clifford, so it's a little bit different than having someone like Jalen Hurts. So you just gave me a really big flashback. And this is like something that really happens in these offensive meetings. And it was really an interesting thing that's one of your favorite plays. And I do think with the personnel that the Eagles have, it makes a lot of sense to incorporate that more.
Yeah. And I didn't want to pick out 50-yard highlight touchdowns where they just bomb a post or something. I wanted to pick out something that's in the flow of a game. You can lean on concepts like this, and why I think they're likely to be effective against a lot of different teams and different coverages. And for people who are fans of the show or watch Philly Film Room, they'll know I continually compare Hertz to 2018, 2019 Russell Wilson. And this play is great for that narrative. Rolling to the left. There's probably no one I've seen except talk about Mahomes who can roll to the left and deliver as good of a ball as Russell Wilson did in his prime. I don't necessarily think Hertz can do that, but this was something we just didn't see a lot, and it didn't surprise me when it worked. So Going on. This next one, you'll remember a touchdown to Goddard against the Ravens. And watching that game back, man, what a nail biter. I actually think the Ravens kind of shot themselves in the foot a lot. But this is another play where it's such an easy read. The chances of completing it is extremely high. The chance of something going wrong is extremely low. And then you get A.J. Brown basically picking off the defender. So essentially, Goddard's beating Kyle Hamilton here for a touchdown. So if you're doing it against the best in the league, that tells me it's reproducible against better talent. And I'm a sucker for these type of plays. You can even have ones where the guy is doing a split zone action where they work across the back of the line and you do the same concept. You just hit them in the flat still. Because often you're pairing that with run action and the edge is expecting the tight end to crash into him, except he just leaks into the flat and it's bloop, and he's running off. And obviously Goddard's amazing at yak. So any thoughts on that play?
So that actually was my favorite play at Penn State that we ran with the split flow action. Basically, we called it Gladiator's Flock when we were at Penn State, and it was a big red zone play that we had where the tight end comes across, and it's basically you almost have a triple option. We also had on the backside of it, we had a speed out, which was your first read. If you had open access is what we called it. If you had access, you would take the speed out. If not, you would go and you would make that read on the defensive end, and you basically could throw it to the tight end coming across, or as the quarterback, you knife up the field, depending on if the alley player takes the tight end or not. So I love that concept. I love that play. We called it a lot at Penn State. It's a great play. Mostly I like the split flow.
And it can go in any part of the call sheet. It's not necessarily only for the red zone. Sure. It's not only for short yardage. You could call that in the middle of the field on 1st and 10 or on 3rd and 2. That's another nice thing. And then depending on when you call it, it makes that run action a little bit more believable. And really often you're going to get that 2x2 or, 2-on-2, to the top of the screen there. And A.J. Brown's a big boy. He's going to get in the way. And Goddard, how many angry runs did he have in the last couple of years? So it's just something Kevin Patullo talked about. We're not going to obsess over play designs as much as we are going to make sure we get it, our good players the ball and put them in position to actually be able to exploit the defense. And this is a perfect example of that.
Great play selection so far.
Getting into our next one, another double up on Goddard here. Everyone will remember this play. It's the corner post from the slot from Goddard. And this kind of got the Eagles some juice after a really slow start to the game on offense. And this is a pure designer concept. That's why I love it. You're reading Goddard the entire way here. And if you get that look that you're like man coverage or single high, you're going to throw this more often than not. So this is a scheme play. They're installing it because they anticipate what kind of defenses the Saints are going to be in. Man coverage here. And he absolutely cooks. It's something I wish they ran a little bit more of, not only for Goddard, but Devontae. Both of these guys are lethal vertical threats. Obviously Goddard's not going to run 50 yards down the field, but like these kind of concepts where he gets in space, that's where he can really use his body to shield off defensive backs. And obviously he put a pretty darn good fake on this guy. I mean, the whole entire way he's expecting him to run to the top of the screen. Inside release, corner, nope. And then that leverage, that's such an easy throw for the quarterback as well. He can just lead him into space because where he lines up there, absolute money. And kind of the thematic piece I wanted to talk about with this play is it was specifically designed route for Goddard to win a specific matchup, something that I thought was sorely lacking in the Eagles pass game throughout most of last season. AJ, what was he getting? He was getting comebacks, go balls, the occasional dig. It was pretty darn vanilla. They run that little China concept with the in and the corner. I just think if he, especially against zone coverage, if you draw up more designer plays to attack zone coverage, you're talking about a guy who can lead the league in receiving. He can win on any route against man coverage. But if you just say like, okay, I'm going to hike the ball. If I read man post snap, I'm going to AJ no matter what. Great. But if it's zone, now what? I make a full field progression. Dotson and Calcaterra running into the exact same part of the field for some odd reason. Then I'm drifting from the pocket and throwing it away. So that's kind of the point I wanted to make with that one. We getting into the next play. Now, this play, I'll preface it. It was not a highly successful play, but it was, I guess, emblematic of something I like to see. So this is a swing pass to Barkley, extremely unique formation. You have motion, and you get a double team on the outside corner for this swing play, which is a very unorthodox concept. Now, the trouble here is the two lead blockers are scrawny receivers, which is something that I kept trying to say the Eagles should not do. They did it with Britton Covey early in the season. They did it with Paris Campbell and Jahan Dotson later. I don't know why you would think that would work. You might as well just telegraph the play and put Johnny Wilson on the field. But I really like this concept. You're getting Barkley. It's basically like a quasi toss play because you're just getting him on the outside in space with some lead blockers. And it's a really high completion. It's not a fumble if he doesn't catch it for whatever reason. If you just had some better blockers. Now, I will say the edge read this play really well, and he kind of hawked him down from behind. But you had some better blockers and a edge that was really trying to go for a sack. Now you're talking about potentially big yardage. So
was this the only time they ran this concept?
I didn't see this a single other time the entire season. So, they had other swing plays for sure, but nothing where they had three lead blockers on the outside and then Saquon cheating in this kind of offset wing formation.
With another blockers, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I really like that. Great point.
Yeah. And the other one I'd like to see him get involved in the passing game is on those over the ball dump offs. If you're running a pure progression where it's 1, 2, 3, and no one comes open, you don't want to drift from the pocket and toss it away or pray that a scramble lane opens. Sometimes that's okay, but we know the Eagles are not good in scramble drill. And if you watch the Steelers from last year, it's something they gave to Russell Wilson, a little bit of an outlet, just drop it off to Warren or Najee Harris. They were picking up 5 to 8 yards at will with those dump offs. It's just cheap yardage.
And those aren't Saquon Barkley. So
the hook defenders get pulled, back by a myriad of different routes, especially in pure progression. You have, after 3 or 4 seconds, if you're not sacked, you want that little easy outlet. And then, yeah, exactly. You have Saquon Barkley. The few times we did see that, I remember it was against the Commanders, over the ball dump off. He ran for 40 something yards after that. So I am a big advocate of hitting the easy button. If you notice, it's a trend throughout these plays, which is either designer plays to attack specific coverages for your playmakers, or some unorthodox ways to attack from, some kind of unbalanced formations, or hitting the easy button. So getting into this last play here, this is a Hertz designed run. And the East-West plays, for everyone who's been watching, we know those are terrible. His lateral agility is not what it was his first 2 years. You may recall those incredible jump cuts or just plant and cut where he would juke out edge defenders in the open field. We don't see that anymore. Whether it's him preserving his body or he doesn't have it, regardless, it's not effective. But the north-south runs are awesome. You can really exploit light boxes this way. All you got to do is pop a bunch of receivers out wide, any spread formation. You're getting a 6-man box count really often. And then you have Saquon Barkley potentially, if you want, as a lead blocker. They don't do it on this play. They just kind of freeze the edge with this zone read action. But, there's a lot of different ways to run this type of play. You could even run it out of empty. It's something you see in college as a trend is run plays out of empty, and you put 2 tight ends on the field. You spread everyone out. The defense doesn't know what to do often. And then you actually get Herz running in the style he's most effective at. North, south, linear with power, rather than trying to be nimble on the edge. So did you have any thoughts about this type of concepts or this specific play?
So if you watch, everyone is respecting Saquon. He's a leading rusher in the league this year. But you can see in the play, everybody turns and gives him attention because they have to. You have to respect that ball could go to Saquon. And I think that's one of the benefits of having that run action there. And I think when you have someone like Saquon Barkley, that's a great way to take advantage of it and get some, like you said, an easy button, because everybody did turn and gave Saquon attention because they have to. You have to respect that option. So
exactly, it's a 1-2 punch. The next drive you come back and you hand it off to him, and maybe you throw in a puller, and now it's like, crap, which one's coming? And in fact, this was a packaged play. They had like 3 or 4 successful plays out of this exact formation in just a few minutes span against the Ravens. They had one where they handed it off. They had on the Goddard dump off. The other one, I think it was a slant to AJ. They had him isolated away from the trips. And then they had a bunch of like pretend like tunnel screen. And then boom, just AJ gets inside of Wiggins for like an easy 10-yard slant. So, they're capable of it, but they just stripped down the offense. They wanted to be turnover averse. Sometimes, designer concepts may be a little bit higher variance. If you coach them really well, like Ben Johnson, I don't think they are, unless you're like throwing with Jamison Williams in the playoffs. But I just want them to lean into that stuff a little bit more. You don't need to call Hank and snag and drag and spacing 1,000 times in a season. So yeah, that kind of wraps up some 5 plays that I thought were emblematic of concepts that I like to see and hope they employ more in the future.
Love it.
Okay, next mailbag question from Edge Tucker. Shout out to the namesake Edge. How do you feel about Jix Hunt taking a bigger role? What were your thoughts on him when the Eagles drafted him? So I'll kick this one over to you because I talked a lot.
Oh, you're totally good. So, I'll admit, when Jix Hunt was drafted, I was a little bit, I didn't feel great about it. I'll be honest. Listen, I knew he was a project but a high upside guy. But I honestly didn't expect him to contribute even as much as he did, especially during the playoffs. So that's a pleasant surprise. But look, it's all a process, right? Like even us, we go through and we try to improve it. And maybe that's why I was pretty harsh on the Makuba pick this year. And maybe it's the same thing, you gotta give him some time to grow. And so I think with Hunt especially, felt really good about what he did and what he contributed. And I think in a bigger role, and I love how we're talking about this after we talked about the first question that we started the day with, because I think that if given more opportunities, he will be successful. But I do think some of his reps will be cannibalized by some of the other rotational pass rush pieces that they added. So that being said, pretty comfortable, especially with how he finished off. Pleasantly surprised. And that's what I'd say.
Yeah, he definitely exceeded my expectations in year 1. For those who didn't watch Philly Film Room, my expectations were he would not see the field. It'd be kind of a redshirt season. with Huff and Graham's injury, he was kind of vaulted into those snaps. I don't necessarily think it was like merit based. His athleticism didn't surprise me, being a former safety. But what did surprise me was his power and anchor in the run game. You just don't expect that from someone who used to be the build that he was. And I invite people who haven't seen, I did a thread on Twitter of some of his best plays in the run game. I mean, this guy's no joke. So I feel very comfortable with it's kind of amazing that the Eagles have two guys with that level of speed at edge who also are that tenacious in the run game. I mean, well done by the scouts, well done by the coaching staff. I graded the pick as a C plus, but I was instantly won over when I heard his interviews. One of the most charismatic players I've ever heard. Someone who I believe may be a future team captain. That's kind of how he comes across to me. I don't think he'll be a stat stuffer, but as you mentioned, lower snaps and the way he plays. He kind of he's not like, he's a team player. He's not going to freelance for sacks. He's not something who gets like instant wins off the line. But like I said, he'll play that unselfish brand of football, which is what the Eagles are looking for. And he has a really high upside as a bonus dropper in coverage. For those who aren't familiar, I do a Vic Fangio lesson of the week. One of the ones I talked about was a whip where they'll bring like a weak side linebacker, but then the edge on the opposite side, they'll drop. So essentially what they're doing is they're wasting a blocker. The tackle just sits there twiddling his thumbs. Meanwhile, you're overloading the other side. And if they slide to your side, now you have the linebacker screaming up the gap unblocked. So then you have a safety just sitting there in, this little flat coverage. So that's pretty awesome. And what else can you expect from a third rounder? Getting into the next question, we'll take one more, and then if anyone in the live audience wants to throw one our way, we'll throw a bone to you guys. Write a question in the chat, and we'll definitely hit one. All right, this one's from Pick 6 to Gene. Now that Goddard is confirmed back, what position do you anticipate being a weakness or less strong compared to the rest of the team? Not necessarily a liability. And for me, the position that stands out is wide receiver 3. Dotson is a decent player, but the issue is his skill set is not maximized in the Eagles' offensive structure. I know you're a Penn Stater.
I'm biased. I mean, I know John personally. I mean, I worked with him.
Yeah. And I'd rather have a player who's one of three things. Either a deep threat to create more space underneath for the top guys, a dominant blocker to help in the run game or even in the screen game, or a gadget player to help with misdirection, motion, easy yards with sweeps and screens. I really don't think Dotson possesses any of those three abilities. He's more of like a route running intermediate guy. You're talking digs, outs, stuff like that. So I think he's a solid player. He definitely deserves to be on roster. He could be potentially like, he's probably like a solid wide receiver 3. It's just not that he's maximized in the Eagles offense. And people say like, oh, the wide receiver 3 doesn't get any targets, so it doesn't matter. But as I just alluded to, even if you don't get targets, you can provide value to the offense with gravity or with blocking, etc. So I just think there's another type of player I'd insert there. Noah Brown would be like the perfect candidate because he runs these clear out routes like they set his shoes on fire and he levels edge defenders when he does crack blocks. That's the type of guy. And if AJ or Devontae goes down, he can come in and play X. That's the type of guy who'd be perfect. And he's cheap. So like that's the type of player I think would really maximize that slot. Obviously, I like Dotson. He did some good things in the playoffs, but that I just relative to the rest of the team, I'm identifying that as like, okay, they could definitely upgrade there. So what's your pick?
It's so funny because I went through all the positions when I was preparing for this, and I actually put fine with wide receiver 3. I wrote fine. That was what I wrote on it. I'm really a little bit still concerned about that guard position, the right guard position. I think that listen, you should never doubt Stoutland. That's just, you should say that off the bat. But just going from the success they had with Becton, it's going to be hard to replicate that. And I'm not saying that they need to have as much success, and they probably can get a decent percentage of that success replicated. But I'm just not too confident in the personnel that they have, even with the trade, especially with the trade, honestly. So that's kind of where I'd say. I also put, I know you're not going to love this, but I put outside cornerback, the second slot for that. When they're not using Cooper DeJean for that role, I'm a little bit concerned. But listen, you gave me a lot of confidence with your Ringo content. Awesome video, awesome breakdown. But he's still a little bit unproven. So I'm a little bit concerned about probably those two positions more than anything.
Yeah, and that's definitely fair. I mean, if you think about the overall impact on the team of wide receiver 3 compared to starting guard and starting quarterback, it's obviously a bloodbath there. And so I think you have total merit in that position. But I think the Eagles defense is going to be good, even if maybe Ringo or Adoree is just okay. But, the Eagles offense, if Barkley is not cooking, they had some times there where they really stalled, and they have the new coordinator. To me, I think the chances of them being not at the top end of the league, it's a little bit higher on the offensive side, especially with Fangio there. But I totally understand your position. All right. As promised, we're going to see if we got any questions from the audience. Appreciate all the positive comments there. I predicted the wide receiver 3 doesn't matter comment. That's funny. We got one here from Garvey. If the Chiefs' offensive line was such a weak point, how come the Eagles' defensive line were the only ones able to dominate them last year? Well, I think there was extenuating circumstances. They weren't putting a mailman in at guard and then putting Tooney out at tackle until the very end of the season. And it was a problem. It was a problem in the AFC Championship and continued to be a problem in the Super Bowl. And obviously that was a bad decision by them. Not that the alternative would have been much better, but at least they would have had an all-pro at guard if they put Joe Tooney there, former all-pro, and then they could have helped on with the tackle with chip blocks and other kind of tactics. So I just kind of reject the premise there. Did you have any thoughts on that?
No, I totally agree with what you said. They were forced to do some things that I don't think that they would repeat. I think they would have tried a different strategy if they were given another chance. I mean, it worked okay in the AFC Championship, but it was really exploited in the Super Bowl, obviously.
Getting into our next question. Yako Warner asks, what does the ratio of scramble runs versus called runs look like for Jaden Daniels? Do you think the investment the Commanders made into offensive line will change that? And for future mailbag questions, let me tell you guys, we love research questions. At least I do. Sam, if you guys are familiar with his work on Inside the Birds, he does as well. So keep them coming. And there are different charting services. So if you find a discrepancy in the one you've looked at, that's why. Kind of looking at across all of them, Daniels had 52 designed runs, not including quarterback sneaks, and 97 scrambles. In other words, 35% of his total runs were designed. A bonus stat is over 80% of his scrambles were to the right-hand side, which was the highest rate in the NFL. Wow. Knowing tendencies like that is great because you can then plan your defense set up. One of the things teams like to use against Herz is they'll kind of bait him into rolling out to the right they could like overload the left side and then drop the edge and it looks like there's a lot of space, and then they'll kind of loop a guy there and it'll be unexpected. It was something a tactic teams used occasionally to high success. The Eagles did a good job. Other than that awful fourth down, they did a pretty good job wrangling Daniels, and obviously the one where he juked them out in the low red zone. But overall, they did a good job. Granted, he was a little bit hampered, like injury-wise, in the first game. So I think, to answer the question directly, it's more of a product of their scheme and Daniel's skill set. I don't anticipate that changing significantly, regardless of what happens to the composition of their line. Now, every year you got to reinvent your offense. And I think Cliff kind of beat the narrative about him becoming stale and predictable. I thought he was pretty innovative and fresh overall. And a little bit of revisionist history from Eagles fans on that game. 23-34, they're driving and Oren Burks punches the ball out. And then suddenly, before you know it, it's a blowout. They score there. It's a 3-point game. Now the narrative changes. Bottom line, they were moving the ball on offense. They just kept fumbling. So I don't expect it to change regardless of their line. Maybe they decide like, holy crap, Daniels could be a top 5 quarterback. Let's protect him a little bit and call a few less design runs, and he'll scramble anyway. Obviously, I can't anticipate that, but that's kind of my general thoughts. What you got?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much had the same thoughts. But really, what you just said ultimately was what I was going to say. But what I will add to it, which I think takes the conversation a little bit in a different direction, but I think would still be welcomed in the spirit of the question, is the concept of the sophomore slump. And I think every quarterback kind of goes through that a little bit to some extent. And I think it goes down to really what you said. The fact that 80% of his scrambles all went to the same side. I mean, once you have film on a guy, teams react to it and they adjust accordingly. So I think a fun way to kind of take this conversation, and I'm curious your opinion, because of the player that Jaden Daniels is, and honestly the VR part, like there's so many cool aspects that is different than any other quarterback. Do you think he's going to have a sophomore slump?
No, I don't. I think it's the brand of football and the scheme where they push the easy button a lot. Now screens, bubbles, a lot of inside zone where we already know he's good at reading it. And then he's just so fast in the open field that even if he does the wrong thing, he gets away with it anyway. Really good deep ball. So it's like, if you want to predict a sophomore slump, you have to predict the granular area in which he's likely to deteriorate. Were there examples of him, if I had to say, it would be like sometimes when the play gets prolonged, he'll throw like late into traffic, but he already did that his rookie season. Is that going to get even worse next year? Not necessarily something I would anticipate. And it's not like they had a juggernaut, offensive skill room around him. Brian Robinson's not scaring anyone. McLaurin is the one guy with juice, but he's in contract disputes and he's in his 30s now. So, they did lose De'Ami Brown. I do wonder if that's going to make them a little bit less vertically explosive, but he was also a one-dimensional receiver anyway. So, when the Austin Eckler was healthy, they were much more potent. He was a big element to their offense. So overall, I don't anticipate it because I can't really pinpoint one reason other than injury. Being a stick figure who runs seems like you would be a little bit more injury prone than a typical quarterback. Sure. I can't necessarily predict one area in which he's likely to see significant regression. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think not to say he's sophomore slump proof, but I do think the offense he's in, the personnel he has, and I think it got somewhat better. And I think that their play designs are going to be made in ways, because I'm pretty confident in Cliff and the offense that they did, especially with what you were saying, that it's going to mitigate a lot of any regression opportunities. So, and I think that's all you can do for a second-year quarterback. I mean, we saw Stroud, I think, had a decent regression, but it wasn't really necessarily on him. Like some of it was, for sure, but his personnel got worse. So, and you don't really see that. I mean, their personnel got older for sure in some areas for the Commanders. But I don't think it necessarily got worse. I think it might have gotten better. I think net better, at least this year.
Yeah, and one counter argument may be like, oh, now the teams have seen 1 year of Cliff with this college style offense and they'll be better prepared. And I think that argument has merit, but they're the only ones who do that. So are you really going to like put all this time and effort into trying to like stop that scheme when 31 other teams are like running pro style offenses? I don't necessarily think that's the case. Now, maybe like there's a tiny bit of bleed over between them and the Ravens. Not really, though. So yeah, I don't necessarily think they're going to be victims of like teams completely figuring out their schemes. A lot of them are based off like spacing, leverage, and then Daniels just exploiting teams with his speed. So that doesn't just go away overnight, even if you know it's coming. Now, there will be obviously counter punches. We saw the Eagles when they ran those stacks and bunches. They stuck the nickel up in the guy's face, and then if they throw a screen, it's just boom, and they making the tackle behind the line of scrimmage. That was extremely important to them slowing the Commanders down. Other teams got destroyed by the screens. So, maybe that's the blueprint that kind of slows down one part of their offense. But getting into our next question, do teams receive a grace period with the league when juggling contracts to get back under the cap? If for people who saw our salary cap episode, we show a little cap outlook for each team. And if you looked at effective cap space for the Giants, it showed negative cap space. So I'm sure that's what precipitated this question. So they asked, do we expect the Giants to get fined shortly? So as our resident cap expert, I kick this one over to Sam.
Yeah, they're currently cap compliant, so there's no issue. A lot of the issues with I think websites like Over the Cap are the best. I think Over the Cap is the best one, personally. That's the one I'll endorse. They didn't pay me to say that, I promise. But I think that Over the Cap, there's delays, right, in the reporting, and it's not always like perfect, so that you have to expect that. But also, teams do have a grace period. It's about, I think they have 7 days. They have 7 days to become cap compliant, and then the league can take action. So that there's no issue. They're currently cap compliant. Last I checked a couple hours ago, every team is currently cap compliant. So no fines, nothing. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, it would take something really crazy for that kind of penalties to be levied, especially because even if they would go below, like into negative cap space, they can execute their transactions in a sequence where they avoid that. So obviously they have an intimate understanding of what their number is, and they're going to be like, the league's going to be like, hey, what's going on? What's going on if something goes wrong? So I can't anticipate that happening ever again, probably. All right. Getting into our next question. With the smaller edges this year, and next we'll take a question from our live audience. With the smaller edges this year, do you anticipate changes to how the defense operates? We really don't have the size of Sweat and Graham anymore. So I'll let you take this one, Sam.
Yeah, I don't really see too much changing in terms of the defensive scheme, but how they attack their respective offensive players might change. Like, there are several ways to win. Size helps, physicality helps, but athleticism wins. You can win. There's a bunch of different ways to win from the edge position. And so I don't think that they're going to make any schematic changes just based on the size. But you might see them using different techniques. That's really what I'd say for this one.
Yeah, for me, I think you may see a small creep up in base fronts on early downs, especially against run-heavy teams. It's obviously situational, and the team you're going against understanding their tendencies. I believe the percentage was 9 and change, maybe 9.5% of 5-man fronts last year. If we saw 12 or 13%, that wouldn't surprise me at all. But, that's, some people may say that's a negligible change.
I may be in that camp.
Yeah, for me, I agree. Like, there's lots of techniques you can use. Some, like, gap exchange, heavy technique where you have the edge crash inside and then you replace him with a second level defender. Maybe you see more of that. Maybe you see more stunts against on rundowns. Maybe you see more slants, but they're already running all that stuff. The other thing I should note here, as we alluded to earlier, is Hunt and Smith are good against the run. So unless you have like giant maulers like Joe Alt type players, Trent Williams, I'm not too concerned. But if you have a team where their whole lines are behemoths and they have like a potent running game, yeah, maybe you see 25% of snaps and base on those plays. And you go back to the Dolphins, Fangio tape, they did that. So that's kind of how I would answer that.
It's a great question.
All right. As promised, going back to our live audience, got a question. Good one. William Keller. Thoughts on Cooper DeJean playing safety rather than outside corner in base defense? Lots of discussion about this on Twitter. Honest NFL, one of the best follows on Twitter, who kind of draws up diagrams, talks schematics, said, ideally, you just keep him as corner because that's his pedigree. He was an outside corner in college. The technique, the movement, playing from going this way, it's a lot more transferable. So it's not like learning a whole new position rather than top down like safety. I think that's all true, but the prospect of DeJean playing from depth to potentially really capitalizing on his football IQ, instincts, ball skills, and even run fits, that's very appealing to me. And like, I don't necessarily think he would be a dominant outside corner. I think he would be better than Ringo, but not by like a dramatic margin. I think he could be like an all-pro, maybe that's overstating it, Pro Bowl level safety with a little bit of experience. I don't think it's going to happen immediately. But like, let's say he played 250 snaps at safety. I think by the end of that, you're talking about like a really high caliber safety. And you can potentially make a lot more plays on the ball from that alignment than you can from outside corner, where they may just say like, I'll just attack the nickel because it's Mac McWilliams. So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are.
Well, my initial thought was it's really bad for the people that want to sing Cooper DeJean is not a safe, because he would be a safety. So, and I'm going to save everyone from my voice. So that's the only part. But on a real serious note, he has the positional versatility out of pretty much everyone that he could play both, and you're fine with it. I think I love your point about like, where does that matter, right? So like, yeah, he's going to be fine either way, but where's that going to be most impactful? And I probably agree that having him from depth would be really fun. And the fall off of having him, I think it makes sense. I agree with you 100%. And I think that having him at safety could be a useful tool. And honestly, he might be a guy that by the end of his career, he ends up safety. Like that's where he ends up. So.
Yeah. And you could kind of think about it like you want to get your best players on the field, obviously. So then you could kind of just judge it that way. The pairing of Ringo and DeJean versus Makuba and DeJean. What do you prefer? We don't know the answer to that yet. And then there's a small calculus you have to add in of DeJean at safety versus DeJean at corner. Maybe that supersedes the difference in those Makuba-Ringo trade-off. So I trust Fangio will make the right decision there. DeJean already said outside corner, it's taking a lot on his plate. So if that's already a lot, I don't see why it would be that much different than safety. And I'll say this, studying all their coverages, it's very clear to me the nickel is the most complicated. There's so many different ways that they can basically, the way the receivers run their routes, their releases, the route combinations, that's going to dictate the nickel's assignment on any given play. A lot of times, those outside guys, it's like deep third, deep quarter, follow your man everywhere they go. It's not that complicated. Now it's difficult, but it's not that complicated versus match, carry, deliver. Oh, I'm making a smash call and I'm robbing the guy on the outside in the short flat. You're playing palms, matching the number 2. I could go on. There's so many different ways. Carrying the number 2 vertical or passing them off to the will. Then finding work. One play I'll highlight, everyone will remember, was against the Bengals, where Deene was able to basically he walled off, hit the number 2, and then on the coverage that they called, he's supposed to locate the number 1 and then see if he can kind of help on that route. They call it squeezing it between the outside corner and the nickel. And he almost got an interception off Joe Burrow. And it would have been like one of the plays of the year, just with great eyes. This guy's like a football savant. So, that's why Vic wants to keep him in nickel, because he's got that processing, like the quarterback of the defense level processing, him and Bond. And we see in today's NFL, teams put their playmakers in condensed alignments really often. So it's just so valuable to be able to put a stud there.
Yeah, before we move on, I'll just say that I think just because they do something week 1 doesn't mean that's what they're going to do the rest of the season. I think they're going to play around with it a little bit. I think it's possible that they do. I think that's a likely outcome. So we'll see how it evolves throughout the season, and honestly, we'll see what other supporting players step up, because I think that would dictate kind of where they need to do.
Yeah, I mean, you could look back to last year. After the Falcons game, they're changing their run fits, changing their fronts even. They were even like one thing I'll point to is they had guys in a 4 down or hand on the ground stance, edge rushers, and then they allowed them to stand up. So they're willing to be flexible to put the players in the best position to succeed. And I don't anticipate that will change next year. Getting into our next question. This is from our esteemed guest from last week, Matt Polsky. For those who haven't heard that episode, we got deep into football analytics. And he asked, how effective is misdirection in the run game? And if it is really effective, why don't teams do it all the time? So as the offensive line and run game aficionado, I'd like to hear what you got on this one.
Yeah, I kind of would like to study this a little bit more. I think I could get a pretty good project for it because I want to measure the effectiveness. So I feel like for this question, I didn't see this one in time to prepare something very in depth. And I think this is a question where I really like to prepare something in depth, especially because it is from our esteemed friend and contributor. So do you have something for it?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's definitely one that if you come out and you have like a hard position on it, you want it to be backed up by equal evidence. And I could say we don't have that yet. For me, it's situational. If you have Jordan Mailata, one of the most dominant run blockers of the decade, immediately that's going to put a team on their heels. And then you have a puller. So now you have all basically Mack trucks coming on the left side, clearing way, and you have Saquon Barkley running behind it. So it's like, okay, in our weekly installs or just coaching points coming into the game, we need to make sure we're prepared with this. What's our answer to just these incredible players, not doing anything monumental other than just being physical specimens with great technique? And then you recruit a lot of defensive resources to handle that. Now misdirection becomes even more potent. So if you just have like a vanilla crap run game that's not threatening, I don't think bells and whistles are going to do anything. Now, this wasn't run game specific, but people can remember back to the Dolphins game in 23 where the Eagles put on a defensive masterclass out of nowhere. And part of the reason is because, and for people who haven't seen, I did a article on offensive play callers called Architects of Deception. And under the motion masters category, I put McDaniel. Obviously, they're using all
awesome
types
article.
of motion.
Check it out.
I appreciate it. And one of the things the Eagles did is they didn't have their whole defense shift with motion. They didn't necessarily even have guys trying to fly across the formation, weave through their second level to try to match a guy in man. Regardless if they're calling man or zone, they'll just bump one guy over and maintain their structure. That's one of the beauties of the two high shell. It's really easy to handle motion. You only need to move one guy. You don't even need to have, if, like, for example, if the Eagles want to just have Deene follow every single motion, basically becoming the new passing strength, they can do that. And they can, whatever coverage they have called, man, zone, cover 3, cover 4, it doesn't matter. They can do that. Now there's no tell, and they stay sound. So there's ways to neutralize misdirection. And I think you just basically have to have potent offensive threats to be able to weaponize misdirection. And then it can become really effective. And that, I think that's kind of answers the second part. Why don't teams do it all the time? Because they can't capitalize on misdirection because they don't have that primary threat to counter off of it.
So it's like a poker game, right? I mean, if you're playing your hand straight every time, I mean, there's a certain level of you have to bluff or not. If you don't bluff ever and you bluff one time, it can be really effective or not effective at all. It's just really about believability.
Absolutely.
In other words of saying what you just said in a different context.
And there are teams like, for example, you look at Demario Davis, one of the better off-ball linebackers of the last decade. And at the snap, he's like frozen in time because he's waiting to see what happens, and then he triggers. Versus there are other highly reactive linebackers who, as soon as the guard pulls, it's boom, I'm going. And sometimes that can be amazing. Edgerrin Cooper, he's reading the offensive line. But you go back to his college tape, and they have some pullers like GT counter, but it's a fake. And then he's 20 yards away from the play. So it's a double-edged sword, and, you know, all of those elements go into the calculus of why it is effective or why teams may employ it more frequently than others. But I do think it warrants even further research, and we'll definitely follow up on that in a future episode. I want to say, quick teaser, we have an incredible guest that we have lined up for a future episode, probably in the next few weeks. However big you're thinking, think bigger. I mean, I literally am blown away by who we are going to have on this podcast. So get excited. I'm not going to spill the beans, but I thought I'd just throw that in there.
You'll love it, though.
Over 300 of you guys, live viewers. That's awesome. We appreciate that. All right, getting into our last question here, and then maybe we'll take like a question or two from our audience before we get out of here. All right, from Jirok, which edge is more likely to develop into a Pro Bowl player? Is it Nolan Smith with his exceptional athleticism, despite being a bit undersized, or is it Jix Hunt, who looks like he was built in a lab? I'll kick this one to you.
Oh, I love this question. We really did touch on both players pretty well. And I think the really cheap answer is it's too soon to tell, right? I think that both of them have great cases for it. But I'm not going to give just the cheap answer. I just think that that's probably the right answer, is probably it's too soon to tell. Because I think with what we have, the answer is probably Nolan Smith, just because we've seen a lot more of Nolan Smith's game. That being said, if Jix Hunt can unlock what he did at the end near the playoffs, I think he has just as great of a case. And I honestly think they could both turn into it. They both couldn't. I wouldn't be surprised if it was either or. All outcomes are possible here. We've seen a decent sample size from Nolan Smith, especially this year. And we've seen only, I'm looking at his snap counts in the pass rush situations was only 194 for Jix Hunt. And Nolan Smith was 425. So again, like, it's hard to tell just based on that one season for Jix Hunt. But I think my answer right now would be Smith, with the caveat Hopefully both.
Yeah, and I would kind of look at this as what it is, Pro Bowl likelihood, and that's based off production. You can be Quinyon Mitchell, one of the best corners in the NFL, no Pro Bowl, no production until the playoffs. And that's where I feel like Hunt falls in, where he could have a really high impact, but not have the counting stats. I really don't think he's going to get the counting stats, but Nolan Smith easily can. So I think he's much more likely. But I'd like to actually give a shout out to Ojomo, because I think he's another guy where I do think he will have a Pro Bowl level impact next year, but he won't have the counting stats, so he won't make it. So I'm gonna plant that flag right now. Everyone who's looked at my Twitter or watched previous episodes with the Ojomo breakdown knows how big of a fan I am of this guy. But yeah, it's a clear Smith for me on this one.
Let me ask you this. You put an average player next to Jalen Carter. Is Ojomo going to be above, below, or at that line?
Way above. Like, it's so easy to say whoever's next to Jalen Carter is going to eat. And obviously, I understand that has merit. But, like, who are they putting next to Chris Jones? Did they eat? Not really. And, like, even you could even say Dexter Lawrence to a degree. I understand it. More one-on-ones. But let's say, in a vacuum, Milton Williams was a beast. Moro Jomo was a beast empirically on film. Stunts, one-on-ones, whatever you want to call it. So, yes, obviously I understand the logic there, but I'm sitting there and I'm watching Pasha snaps of all of these defensive tackles, and they're not popping off the film like Ojomo. So I don't want people to be too hasty and saying like, oh, the reason he's cooking is Carter. It helps. You can weaponize it. If teams are sliding to Carter, yes, you're going to get more one-on-ones. Great. If you want to overload one side of the line and then you run a little interior pick stunt and free up Ojomo, that's amazing. Why wouldn't you do that? So yes, the gravity and ability of Carter obviously makes the guy next to him better, but it doesn't automatically make him better, and it doesn't make that guy better than he would be had he not had Carter next to him. And we'll see examples when Ojomo is next to Ty Robinson, and then you can evaluate it in a vacuum for yourself.
Let me put you in even more of a box. You ready for this? You said way above the average player. Where does he fall with 2024, 2025 Milton Williams? Where is his outcome likely to be?
Yeah, so he doesn't have the power that Milton does. So if you're talking about like anchor in the run game or collapsing pockets, he just doesn't provide that. And I think both of those things are highly valuable. But in terms of just sheer violence off the line, shedding blocks, and potentially hitting the quarterback, I think he's awesome. In terms of beating reach blocks to the edge and spilling runs, he's better than Milton. So it's a give and take. The net outcome, the thing is, Milton snaps will not get all allocated to Ojomo. They'll be spread between him and Robinson likely, and that kind of changes the calculus here. So probably a little bit less, but just on a per snap basis, I think, especially in pass rush, you're talking like on par. Wow. And we saw how much money Milton Williams got. I mean, it was a comical amount, but predictable. Like, you saw like how many sack and a half in the Super Bowl, incredible advanced analytics, younger guy. That doesn't surprise me. Now, granted, he was going to sign with another team at the 11th hour. The Patriots came in and gave him like 3 or 4 million more. That's why he ended up making 26. But like like I said, Moro Ojomo, you're talking about a Pro Bowl level impact when he's in the game.
That's a flag plant right here, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. And listen, I think people will agree. Like, people who have followed my content for a little bit, I'm not big on hyperbole. I'm not going to like get overly excited or say like, Herz is an elite QB. If you don't think that, you're an idiot, blah, blah, blah. Like, I really try to keep it grounded, backed by empirical evidence. And the empirical evidence tells me Ojomo's awesome. So, all right. getting into our 2-minute drill. This is a segment where we ask unprepared, candid questions to our co-host. So I'm going to ask you first, Sam. If the Eagles underperform to expectation, barring injury, what do you think the reason will be?
I think it's probably offensive play calling. That would make, right now at this point, would make the most sense for me. They're going. I did just shout them out last week. Like, I'm not trying to be contradictory here, but listen, there's a lot. I did say last week that there's a lot of question marks with Patullo, and I think if they regress significantly, the most likely outcome, barring injuries, like you said, is that they just didn't figure out a way to, tailor the offense right, like continue to do what strengthens the players and mitigates the weaknesses, and they just didn't call them at the right times. So that would probably be my guess.
Yeah, I think it's totally valid. Someone might else point to cornerback. Now, the thing is, they've got two options. Let's say I'm totally wrong and Ringo's terrible. Well, now you have a proven cornerback who, to me, it's not that much of a projection. I view Adoree Jackson as a very small tick below Isaiah Rodgers. I really like Rodgers. I like if I were the GM, and I don't know if there's other off the field stuff, like he's not locked in the meeting rooms, etc. But like for his contract, $5 million, I mean, what a bargain. In fact, I combed through every single veteran contract in the entire NFL trying to find who was the best value. And I looked at Rodgers as like way up there, if not the best value contract in the entire NFL. $5 million for, like, you're talking about a guy who could be like a cornerback one. Like, I really think he's that good. And he would be cold off the bench, come in, play a stud receiver, Jamar Chase, and generate an interception within 3 snaps on an unbelievable tip. He would lay the boom. He's the skinniest guy I've ever seen, and he would absolutely crush people in the open field. He's an unbelievable player. The fact that he got $5 million, it's mind-boggling. Now, it makes sense, like limited snaps, checkered pass, small guy playing on the outside. I understand why it happened, but like how that's easily worth that whatever. Now, granted, they got Adoree for peanuts. So if he's only a tick below Rodgers and you save that $4 or $5 million, great. That because they didn't at the time they didn't know what their cap picture was going to be post Adoree signing, and they have a lot of extensions coming up. But all that to say, he's a good backup option. It's not like both of those guys are going to fail miserably. So that's kind of why I feel like the cornerback is not going to be their undoing. Now, we should say, football, it's a 1-game sample size. Once you get to the playoffs, now if one of those guys has a bad game, okay, maybe that loses it for you. But I'm totally with you. Like, if Patullo is just in over his head, has no idea how to sequence plays, doesn't have feel for the game, there's like 20 seconds on the play clock and he goes, let's go to the counter bash. Like, panicking. It's one of the most underappreciated aspects of play calling is you got to be like this, boom, 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 knowing exactly where you're going to go, reading, like looking at the defense, understanding their tendencies, looking out who's on the field, who's tired, all of that kind of stuff. Oops, I forgot to get AJ the ball the last quarter. There's so many things you have to juggle, and you have to do it before the time runs out, before the mic cuts off. He has no experience doing that. So if I were the coach, I would say we literally need to do this, simulate this in practice like it's a game, headsets and all. And I don't know if they do that. Maybe you have more like context behind that. Like, to what extent do they like practice getting all that situated? But I agree with you overall.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we practice everything. At least we did at Penn State, like every situation. I actually had an opportunity to do play calling a little bit during scrimmages. I got to call the scout team offense, which was really fun, but it is stressful. I had a limited playbook. I had to like remember what plays. I had to figure out what was good in what situations. So, I mean, I did it at such like I could fail all I wanted. It didn't matter. No one was there. No one saw. So to do that at the highest level with everything on the line, I have a lot of respect and admiration, but there's a reason why you need experience in that. So,
and what I think ultimately happens is you end up developing crutches, because obviously you don't want to panic. So what do? You have contingency plans. And so if you're saying anytime I don't know what to do and it's running low, I'm going to go to this staple play. I'm going to go to inside zone. I'm going to go to dagger if I'm the Rams, or if I'm the Eagles, I'm going to go to Hank or China or drive, whatever, doesn't matter. And we'll see that clear as day. And if Patullo's not doing this job, you can better bet your ass I'm going to be calling him out on social media. So
he's here, folks.
Yeah. So I want to hear what you got.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, who is the most underappreciated role player on the Eagles? Does this role player that you're thinking of have a chance to contribute in a more of a starting opportunity, either now or in the future?
Yeah, for me, it's Ben Van Sumeren. We saw glimpses of it last year. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying about Dotson, where I don't think his skill set is maximized. So now immediately I think of, rather than trying to like design concepts for Dotson, I think that's just ridiculous because they're already not doing that a lot for their studs. Put different guys on the field. Calcaterra, well, he stinks at blocking. He offers some element in like, yak situations, getting him open, like on a chip release kind of deal where you're getting him in space, blah, 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 but not necessarily opening up the offense. Then you look at Ben Van Sumeren. Now you have a whole different dynamic of your offense that the defense has to prepare for. Under center. When he's in the game, you're going to be under center way more often. I like under center. And now you have potentially, you're getting 5 players out into routes from under center, or you have a power run game. That's a headache to deal with if you're the defense. And this guy with 0 experience was blowing up linebackers as a lead blocker. Now, I've said earlier, I'm not big on hyperbole. Watching him, I thought as a move blocker, this guy was just a tick below Kyle Juszczyk. Now, I don't think he's the runner that Juszczyk is. I don't think he's the pass catcher. I don't think he has the polish or obviously the experience or IQ of that position. But athleticism, yes. In fact, this guy's the most athletic fullback of all time. And that's not hyperbole. 9.9 something RAS, absolutely blazer in the open field, and basically plays like a gorilla, where he'll run into people full speed and not worry about it, like the fullbacks of yesteryear, where they just continually like charge into guys and lower their head. So I really am intrigued by how Lurie said it himself, we're going to try to bring back the fullback. I don't think it's going to be a big part of their offense, but when they just, maybe they have a slow 2 or 3 drives and then they go to that, boom. Now you've just reset the offense. You get the chains moving and you make the defense prepare for another thing. If they don't prepare for these kind of, offset eye formations with maybe even bring in another offensive lineman, something I've always liked the Eagles. I don't know why they don't do it more, like tackle over formations. They've got these behemoths now, Hinton, if they want to throw in Holland Pierce, Cam Williams, whoever, take your pick, Kendall Lamb. Why aren't they playing 6 offensive linemen in there sometimes instead of Dotson or Calcaterra? And then you throw in Van Sumeren. Now you have an under center play action game where you're running Yankee concepts with Smith and Brown. Now you have a power run game where you have unbelievable behemoths, road graders creating space, and then you have Ben Van Sumeren working in space, and oh, by the way, Saquon Barkley behind him. That is scary. If I'm a defensive coordinator, I'm like I hope they don't go heavy. Because even if they do, they're still easy play action concepts off of that. It's something they haven't gone into, like these wide zone analogs, make Shanahan play action stuff. It's not something they really venture into. But if they had like 5% of their offense that they just brought that out for like one drive, I think automatically, that's worth more than its sum of its parts. So for a role player, I would go for Van Sumeren.
That was a brilliant answer. Thank you for that.
All right. Teaser for next week. I don't know what we're going to do next week. So if you have a suggestion, throw it in the comments. But in 2 weeks, we're going to have Cody Alexander of Match Quarters to talk all things defense. This guy's the preeminent expert on the internet for coverage mechanics and all things like this. Unbelievable social media presence. We're pumped to have him on. If you're one of those Eagles fans who enjoys in-depth analysis, like hopefully we provided today, discussion about players, salary, analytics, and everything else, you're just one of us. And we sincerely appreciate it. If you can shoot us a like, drop us a comment. We read them all. If you're new, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of future episodes when we go live. So without further ado, I'm Eagles Eric. That's Sam Finkel. And this has been another episode of The Edge.